Manase Katha.
Deshana, to continue our conversation, I would like to ask, as a society, how do we perpetuate the colonial mentality towards English?
Yeah, I think we do so many different things, right? One of the things is that we are not deeply examining, right? Like these things, like we are not examining the implication of colonization and connecting this English superiority to colonization, right? Now, if we take our school systems, right? Like I honestly can't speak to, and maybe one of you can speak to the school system today, but I can speak to when I grew up, right? So when I grew up, when we learned about colonization in school, I didn't learn about this level of damaging impact, right? Nobody connected to me that this kind of shame we felt about our own language was because of colonization, right? Nobody connected it that to me. And I remember like this story, for example, this is how it was presented, colonization was presented to us. Like I remember in school learning about Robert Knox, how he wrote this book and he talked about Sri Lanka, but we never discussed how was Sri Lanka presented and who was Robert Knox. Robert Knox actually was imprisoned for a while and he actually had such a negative attitude towards Sri Lanka. And if you read the book critically, you will see how we were not really portrayed in positive ways, right? And also like that book that I mentioned to you, Exterminate All the Brutes, talks about Robert Knox having such a negative view of South Asians, right? We don't talk about those kinds of things. Instead, like in school, what we were presented was colonialism and what the British rule was as facts, right? Instead of talking about Donomo government and government was this, and them quizzing us about some factors related to Donomo government and all of that. If Robert Knox, when did he write the book and all of that? Instead of that, if they really taught us about impact of colonization and how it degraded and eroded and destroyed our native cultures, including language, and these feelings of shame towards ourselves and towards our own language, and this superiority we feel for English was because of this. These are byproducts of colonization. If they taught us something like that, then I think as especially as young kids, we would be able to have discussions and critically look at things, right? But nobody told us that. And the fact that I mentioned earlier, like even when it comes to parents, right? Like because parents are so traumatized, they themselves go through this trauma and they want to, and as parents, obviously parents want to protect their children, right? And they want to protect their children from anything they went through, and they want to make sure that children have the best opportunities in life. And so then the children, they don't encourage children to learn Sinhalese. Instead they put so much emphasis on English, and then that creates, inadvertently that creates such damage, right? And in the workplaces, right? And the another thing is like in workplaces, when we make English the business language. I mean, I understand for global businesses that's really important, but when we exclude people, but when we have this attitude towards English, and anybody who is monolingual Sinhalese or monolingual Tamil are not given any opportunity, then those people, their degrees, everything they have acquired is rendered useless, right? Because they can't use those skills, because one thing, they don't have that English language ability, right? They have all the skill set, they can do the job very well, but then because they can't enter into a system that hierarchically values a different language, they can't function, right? And so I think those things, instead of that, if we teach people equally, right? If we teach Sinhalese, Tamil, English equally, and we encourage children to learn multiple languages, not just those three languages, but French, Hindi, Japanese, and as many languages as possible, their abilities, their access to different communities, and their social, like their access and their ability to go into the job market, not just within Sri Lanka, but globally also increases, right? If we emphasize that aspect, right? But we are stuck with this, vicious cycle of English is superior. And so we are going to exclude people, but we are stuck in that cycle, right? Sadly.
Yes, sometimes actually we don't realize that we still carry this colonial mindset, but what we do is we are still feeding the idea that English is better and our own languages are, less. Um, um, so sometimes we judge people or children, their intelligence by their English fluency. If we hear someone speak broken English, like we also do, I mean, being honest, and we think, oh, poor thing, not educated or something like that. But the same person might be a genius in Sinhala or in Tamil language. So there is perspective to this matter.
Yeah, that's this concept of Gode and posh, right? Posh is
Yes.
if you speak English, and the more fluent you are, more British-like or American-like the accent and fluency, grammar, flow, everything, then more posh you are considered. And then the more you struggle in English, uh, more Gode you're considered, right? It doesn't matter how well off or how educated that person is, but the term Gode it has this connotation: you're backward, you're not forward thinking, you're stuck, so not cosmopolitan, that kind of connotation, right? There's so many negative things attached to that term Gode, right? In Sinhalese, and that and then also such a positive, artificially positive things attached to the term posh, right? Which directly comes from um, England, right? The term posh comes from England, right? And so we have these things that in Sri Lanka it has its own meaning, right? And that itself is such a barrier, right? It's such a barrier that divides communities, divides within families, divides extended family, divides communities, divide rural, cosmopolitan, divides. Like it gives such a it it also creates class, right? Class divisions, right? Because it's also to be considered high society, high class, or middle class, you need English, right? There's that unspoken code that we all know to be considered a certain class in our society. You need to have the ability to speak English, right? That's how sadly our community society works, right? And it's sad, but that's the reality that is there today.
Yes, somehow we have to brainstorm uh, that we should not be ashamed of uh, making mistakes in other languages, our own language, mother tongue. If we do a mistake, we have to be shamed of. But if it's English or other language, which is a second language, we should not be ashamed of. We should get continuous improvement, development. That's accepted, but we should have that attitude, that value, that respect to our own language. So, where we see a grammatical mistake or some kind of mistake with our own language, actually we have to have a shame, but it's on the other way. So we have to give the right uh, place, right value set to our own language. So then only we can be a proud nation. Then only we can be proud Sri Lankans.
Can I push you a little, Anupa?
Yes.
I think because language is such a strong tool, I would say we shouldn't feel ashamed about not speaking Sinhalese properly either. I think we should
Mm.
have pride in being able to speak. We shouldn't, I don't think that any language, right? The more languages you
Mm.
learn, the more you try, it's a point of pride, right? I think
Yes,
it's,
yes, yes.
I think the
Agree.
issue is that with English, there is such negativity, right? There's shame. And that kind of association is not there for Sinhalese, and that's good. But the issue is that mm, but underneath that is devaluing of language. That's why it's not because it's not a positive thing, because underneath that, if you unpack that, underneath of that lack of shame, if you don't speak Sinhalese well, is this belief that Sinhalese is beneath me. So it's okay if I don't speak Sinhalese well. It's fashionable to speak broken Sinhalese. It's not a language that I should take pride in. So that's why most of the people are not ashamed to, when they don't speak Sinhalese fluently. But because English has that such a um, English, for us, it's taught as it's a lifestyle, it's a status symbol, it is, it's something to be proud of, and it should define you. That's why if we don't speak English fluently, then we feel ashamed, right? So that I think we need to make sure we distinguish that, right? It's
Yes, I 100% agree with your point. You have clarified it clearly.
And I want to pause for a moment and talk about something I have seen very often. And it is something about which carries both love and sadness. I'm sure Anupandishna will agree with me on this. Many parents in Sri Lanka, especially those who didn't have formal education or didn't grow up speaking English, are now doing everything they can do to give their children a better future. And for them, um, that often means one thing, that is putting their children into English speaking international schools. I think that has become the trend for many years now. And then I understand it, and it comes from love, sacrifice, and the dream of giving their children more opportunities than they had. But here's the heartbreaking part. These same parents often can't even help their children with their homework, right? They sit at the table watching their child struggle, but the books are in a language they don't understand. They feel helpless, they feel disconnected, and they feel that they are not doing the right thing. I mean, the best possible things that they could for their children. and sometimes they start believing my language, my education is not enough. I believe that's where the damage begins, right? Not just to the parent, but to the child as well.
Yeah.
Because slowly, what it does is the child started learning that success equals to English and home equals to failure. Maybe that kind of a realization
Mentality.
starts, stemming from this situation. They stop speaking in Sinhalese or Tamil. They stop asking their parents for help, and even as Dishna and Anupa mentioned, they even feel embarrassed to bring friends home. So that detachment slowly start to happen between the parent and the child because of that reason. So what was really meant to be a gift, a good education, can sometimes turn into a wall
Yeah.
between generations. But it doesn't have to be this way, right? So we need to build a system that says, yet let children learn English, but not by erasing who they are, right?
Yeah, and I think you like I want to emphasize something you just said. If English is viewed as what is successful, right? And if their parents are not to the standard that now they are striving to be, right? Then naturally they're going to view their parents as failures, right?
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely. That's what my point is. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. That I want to emphasize that that is what you said is that is so powerful because right there we are teaching our children to devalue us even though that is not at all what the parents are trying to do, but that is once again it's nothing wrong with the individual parents. They're trying to do the best they can, they're giving everything, but it's that colonial legacy, right? It's a remnant of colonial legacy, right? It's we have it here because as I said before, even for parents, teaching children to take pride in Sinhala and speaking it in Sinhala or Tamil is an act of resistance. Why is it act of resistance? It's because of colonization. It is resisting the remnants of colonization, right? It is taking pride in speaking Sinhalese or Tamil is an act of resistance because we have been trained to believe that our languages are shameful, our languages are uh, not at the same level as English, and it is okay. English Sinhalese is subpar, so if you don't speak that language, that's okay. That actually gives you more class in the Sri Lankan society, especially for the younger generations, right? So then it becomes a thing that is okay to reject, but then we also, if Sinhalese is only spoken in Sri Lanka, like Tamil, it at least is spoken also in South India, but Sinhalese is only spoken in Sri Lanka. So if we generationally like erase the language, along with that, the language goes away. Along with language, a lot of cultural and customs go away because language is a key aspect of culture, right? A lot of like our cultural traditions are around, you know, um, you know, that language, right? Like if you, even if you go to a religious sermon, right? It's not the same thing if you talk about, if you preach that in English, it's not the same thing, right? There's some cultural essence that is lost when you preach it in English as opposed to preaching it in Sinhalese or, or Tamil, right? So I think we are there is natural adaptation that happens, but I think the biggest issue for me is that along with that is the damage to psyche that, like Anupa talked about earlier. Like if we are Sri Lankans and our native tongues are Sinhalese and Tamil, then if we are ashamed of our languages, then we are ashamed of who we are, our origins, right? We are still believing that colonial message that who we are is not good enough, right? We are still believing that when the British came and colonized us, I don't know, about 200 years ago, when they came and colonized us, they to rule, to be able to colonize, they created this system where locals are inferior, so locals' languages are inferior. That mentality we are still continuing, right? That's the danger
But
to me.
yeah, but Ishna, I want to disagree with you in some part of that statement because there's something that truly touches my heart. It's when I see Sinhala families living abroad, like in Australia, Canada, the UK, making a real effort to teach their children Sinhala as a second language, right? Even when English is all around them, even when their kids go to English speaking schools, watch English TV, and dream in English, these parents still say, okay, let's not lose our roots, which is really commendable. And we should appreciate that fact as well, isn't it, Dish?
Yeah.
I've spoken to families where parents sit down after dinner and say, let's practice a few Sinhala words today. Or they'll call the grandparents in Sri Lanka and say, talk to them in Sinhalese, okay? Let them hear the real sound of home. And the children, so they probably reply in broken Sinhala, mixing it with English, saying things like, okay, Amma, uh, can you give me pan nega, but with the jam, please? Something like that. So it is okay. It is okay. It's our own language that, here we have given all the freedom for them to make mistakes in speaking our own language. But when it comes to people who's living in Sri Lanka and speaking English in a broken manner, then they get humiliated. So it is a different story. But actually, this is beautiful. Like when the parents are trying to teach their children, a essence or at least a bit of their native or singular language, and to make them live and grow with it because even across oceans and generations, that effort keeps our culture alive and it keeps our home alive, right? And more than grammar or perfect pronunciation, what matters most is that the child learns. And the child learns to realize that my language matters, my heritage matters, my identity is something to be proud of. So, to all the Sri Lankan families abroad who are doing their best to keep Sinhala alive, thank you so much. And thank you for watching Manase Katha, Whispers of the Heart. And we are highly appreciate your efforts with Whispers of the Heart. You are not just teaching your children just words, and you are planting seeds of belonging um, as Sri Lankans. So thank you.
I do want to like highlight that's also part of colonization, right? Like when we are in Sri Lanka, that's when it impacts us most, right? So when we go abroad, we are in some sense we can escape the shackles of that colonization control. And so then
Mm.
we are also exposed to other things, and then we learn the value of our language, right? People who go abroad, they are uprooted, and then they want to feel like they still have connection to the native land. And so it's really becomes really important for them that they still carry through their children that culture and customs, right? So the more you detach, I think, from these colonial shackles, the more you understand the value of native languages, right? So I think that's really something we to highlight, right? And keep in mind that all of this is like it's none of our fault. It's part of colonization and remnants of colonization, right?
Yes, definitely.
Manase Katha.